Welcome to a special edition of Sellout Crowd. I'm Jenni Carlson here with Eli Lederman. Well, OU is now in the market for a defensive coordinator. News broke Thursday afternoon that Ted Roof mutually departed from the Sooners. We'll talk about that and what's next for the Sooners. But first, a big word of thanks to our sponsor, Oklahoma Ford Dealers Association. Eli, let's talk about the move to split part ways. It was an announced move that was mutually agreed to, according to OU's release. We haven't actually talked to any humans about this yet, but what's your sense of the why behind all of this between Ted Roof and OU football?
Yeah, it's one that was in some ways a surprise, some ways maybe not, depending on how you looked at all this. I think it would have been after last season that a lot of us were wondering if the Sooners might make a change at defensive coordinator, but Ted Roof was back for 2023. And now, just 4 days into 2024, there's a change, and the Sooners have an opening at defensive coordinator. You're right. We've only really gotten, any of the details on this from the program, from the statement from Brent Venables, which outlined sort of a situation where he had certainly decided it was time to move on, find someone else to be the defensive coordinator. According to that statement, Brent Venables gave Ted Roof, an option, an opportunity to remain with the program in a different role. Ted Roof was ultimately not interested, wanted to pursue coaching on the field elsewhere. And so here we are with the Sooners in search of a defensive coordinator and, looking for its second coordinator hire in the span of about 6 weeks, and it's going to send the Sooners into 2024 and into the SEC with two brand new coordinators when we kick off in the fall.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that and what that might mean, whether there's any panic there with Oklahoma now breaking in two brand new coordinators. But while Oklahoma may have a new defensive coordinator, their defensive mastermind, their defensive guru, whatever you want to say, is still very much in Norman. That's Brent Venables. So, Eli, that begs the question, where do the Sooners look? Who could potentially be next when we know that Brent Venables' defense, Brent Venables' philosophies, those are still very much going to be what the Sooners are using?
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's got to be the right person at the right point in their career. And that could be any number of people at different ages, different spots. But this is not a normal coordinator job, and certainly not one at Oklahoma that typically, if you think coordinator opening at Oklahoma, that is a top 10 defensive coordinator job in the country. You would, are they going to go get one of those big, expensive coordinators? The answer is probably no, because you don't have to. Because as you put it, the real mind behind this defense, not to diminish anything Ted Roof did or whoever is going to step into this role will do, is already here. Brent Venables, this is his defense and this is his system, and he's going to be heavily involved no matter what. So that also begs the question, who wants to take that job where they're not coming in to totally overhaul a defense and build a defense in their own image. And so that brings us to, who could be that person to replace Ted Roof. Is it an internal hire? Is it one of Todd Bates, Jay Valai, Brendan Hall, some of those internal guys already on staff who Brent Venables has a lot of trust in? If you do that, perhaps the easiest thing is to find a new linebackers coach. Maybe that person's already on staff. Looking outside, I think the popular name is going to be Zach Alley, who's the Jacksonville State coordinator. He's just 29 years old. So look at those two things. That doesn't scream SEC coordinator. But how about this? He spent 7-8 years working under Brent Venables at Clemson, student assistant, then grad assistant. Spent the last 3 years as a defensive coordinator at Louisiana Monroe first and then Jacksonville State. And, perhaps he's the kind of guy who could step into that role and bide his time. He's 29. Heck of a lot of learning he could do under Brent Venables. Quite a job it would be to take. Maybe that's the direction you go. Or, there are other guys out there, but another challenge here. It's January 4th. A lot of staffs are settled. A lot of coaches in the last month have found their new landing spots for 2024. So Brent Venables will have his work cut out for him. It also could be just as simple as looking around his staff in Norman.
Yeah, I thought when Ted Roof got hired, he seemed like a perfect fit because he was a guy who had risen through the ranks. He had coordinated his own defense for years, but seemed like he was very content being part of Brent Venables' defense and really, sort of doing what he could do to help Venables with this defense. It seems like, as much as anything, yes, you want somebody who aligns with you, aligns with your coaching staff, but you really kind of need somebody who's able to let Brent Venables say, no, we're not going to run that this time around. We're going to run this other thing. It seems like you have to have the right personality potentially for this job.
Yeah, well, let's go back to August, because after what was a pretty brutal first year for Ted Roof and Brent Venables in terms of the defense in 2022, they came back in August of 2023. This is what they laid out, and we don't know how it developed over the course of the season, all the details and where they finished off. But it was going to be a case where Ted Roof was still calling plays, but even he acknowledged Brent Venables pretty heavily involved, maybe even had veto powers. And Brent Venables said in 2023 he was going to be a lot more involved in what the defense was doing, and you've got to be somebody who can deal with that. And it's a really appealing job for the person who can, but this is not the job for the person who's coming in to build their own thing, because Brent Venables already has his defense in place and has a lot of guys who've played in that defense already in place.
You've mentioned the SEC a couple of times, Eli. You've also mentioned 2 new coordinators. I think a lot of people, if they saw those sorts of things in the Oklahoma future, they might say, uh-oh, is something wrong? Is there reason for concern at all? I mean, yes, going to the SEC is going to raise concern regardless, but is there concern as it relates to another new coordinator for Oklahoma as they move forward?
Burn it all down, Jenni. Big trouble, Norman. No, the answer is, if you're worried about this, you go back to that very first point you opened with. If you're an OU fan, Brent Venables is still here. Behind him on the field, a lot of the veteran guys on this team that have made up this defense the last couple of years and will again in the fall, Danny Stutzman, Billy Bowman, Woody Washington, and so on, they're still here. It's not an unimportant hire. This is a big deal. This is something they're going to have to address, but this is different than when Jeff Levy left 6 weeks ago. And this is different even than when Ted Roof arrived a few years ago. The trains are on the tracks with this defense. This is a critical hire for Brent Venables, but this is one that, could be as simple as looking around Norman, could be as simple as going and identifying someone Brent Venables already has a connection with. It's going to be about that partnership. And you've got to imagine that Brent Venables is going to prioritize bringing in somebody he knows he can work with and who can work within this program.
Well, we'll have a lot more as this story evolves, as we find out who could potentially be the next defensive coordinator, when Brent Venables might make that hire, and what impact that could make on Oklahoma's defense moving forward. So stay with Sellout Crowd. We'll have a lot more in the coming days. Thanks for joining us tonight.